Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in front of your computer, finger hovering over the record button, wondering if the time that you're about to invest will ever pay off? Or maybe you've thought about starting a podcast, but that nagging voice in the back of your head just keeps asking you, is this really worth it? Welcome to Fearless Podcasting Academy. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Dean. I've always lived in two worlds, one filled with the magic of storytelling and language, and the other wired with technology and innovation. And through the years of research and teaching and hands-on experience, I've been obsessed with one question: what makes a message truly resonate? And that's why I created the Fearless Podcasting Academy, where creators and entrepreneurs and change makers come to ditch self-doubt, amplify their voices, and build podcasts that demand attention. So whether you're launching your first episode or leveling up your platform, you're in the right place. Because when you learn to use your voice with confidence, you don't just start a podcast, you start a movement. This is Fearless Podcasting Academy. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn. This week, I'm actually sharing a special content series about expert podcasting. Just search Dr. Stephanie Dean Creative and you'll be able to find it. In fact, whenever I talk with coaches or consultants or subject matter experts about podcasting, the question comes up every single time. And it isn't most often about microphones or hosting platforms. It's about their return on the investment. They always ask me, Stephanie, what's the actual ROI of starting a podcast? And that is a fair question. So if you have limited time and limited resources, you want to know that your effort's going to yield results. But the problem is most experts are looking at podcast ROI all wrong. They're focused exclusively on download numbers, sponsor dollars, or direct sales, or what I call the surface metrics. But those metrics miss the profound impact that podcasting can have on your business and on your brand. So today I'm going to share the truth about podcasting ROI, the metrics that actually matter for experts, the unexpected returns you will never see in your hosting platform analytics, and how to accelerate your results without waiting for years for that organic growth. I'm also going to share the story of Dr. Mark. He is a financial advisor I've worked with who went from complete podcasting skeptic to having his calendar booked solid with ideal clients, all within 6 months of launching his show. So by the end of today's episode, you're not going to understand if a podcast is worth your investment, but exactly how to ensure it delivers returns from day one. So let's get started. Okay, when most people think about podcast ROI, they immediately jump to audience size. How many downloads will I get? How quickly will I grow? And these questions come from a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes podcasting powerful for experts. So let me explain by breaking down what I call the 3 dimensions of podcast ROI. So dimension 1 is the connection multiplier. This first dimension is about connection depth, not just reach. Here's a statistic that changed how I view content creation. So according to Edison Research, podcast listeners complete 80 to 90% of their episodes they start. 80 to 90%. The average listening time is approximately 40 minutes per episode. Now compare that to other platforms that you're on right now. Blog posts, the average time spent is 37 seconds. Social media, people scroll past your posts in less than 2 seconds. The average retention rate is around 50% if you're lucky. Nothing, absolutely nothing, gives you 40 minutes of uninterrupted access to someone's attention like podcasting does. So let me tell you about Melissa, another client I've worked with. She's a leadership coach I worked with last year. She's been posting on LinkedIn consistently for 2 years. She's been building a decent following, but when she launched her podcast and mentioned it to her LinkedIn audience, something kind of interesting happened. After just 3 episodes, she received an email from someone who had been following her there for like 2 years, but had never reached out. The person wrote, "I feel like I truly know you now. Your podcast made me realize that we approach leadership development the same way. I'd love to discuss working together." That single email led to a $30,000 contract. What happened? The connection multiplier. Melissa's voice and her listener's ear created an intimacy that 2 years of text posts could not achieve. This is the first ROI dimension that most experts miss. It is not about reaching thousands of people. It is about creating deeper connections with the right people. So, dimension 2, the authority accelerator. The second dimension is about positioning and perception. So in our culture, having a podcast instantly elevates your perceived expertise. Instantly. There's something about hosting your own show that signals authority. Your tech doesn't have to be perfect for this, but it signals authority in a way that few other platforms can match. So a study by Listening Platform found that 78% of podcast listeners perceive hosts as experts in their field, regardless of the show's production quality or audience size. Let me repeat that. Regardless of production quality, regardless of audience size. This perception shift happens because the very act of hosting a podcast positions you as someone with valuable ideas worth sharing, someone confident enough to put their voice out into the world. So let me give you another client example. Dr. Sarah, she's a psychologist who launched her podcast last year, told me something fascinating after just 2 months of publishing. When she introduced herself at networking events, the response to "I'm a psychologist" was polite and people nodded. But when she added, "and I'm the host of Mind Matters podcast," people's eyes lit up. The conversation totally changed. She told me suddenly I wasn't just another therapist there. I was someone with a platform, with a voice, and with a perspective worth having. So within 4 months, she received 3 speaking invitations from organizations that discovered her through her podcast. These speaking gigs generated $15,000 in revenue and multiple new client referrals. That is the authority accelerator at work. That instant credibility boost that comes from having your own show. Dimension 3 is the content ecosystem. And this is a great one because how many times have you said, "I don't have time to do all the social media, all the things"? So this third dimension is about leverage and multiplication. Most experts make a critical mistake when calculating podcast ROI. They view their podcast as a standalone piece of content rather than the foundation of an entire content ecosystem. So here's what I mean by that. A single 30-minute podcast episode can generate 5 to 10 social media posts, 1 to 2 blog articles, multiple email newsletter segments, several YouTube clips, countless conversation starters with prospects, right? That is huge. That saves you so much time. In my own business, each podcast episode I create spawns at least 12 other pieces of content. That 30-minute recording session effectively creates 2 weeks worth of marketing material. So let's do the math here. If you spend 2 hours preparing, recording, and editing a podcast episode, but that episode generates 12 pieces of content you would normally take you 30 minutes each to create from scratch, you've just saved 4 hours of content creation time. That is a 200% ROI on your time investment before you even count the audience, the authority, and the connection benefits. That's huge. So let me tell you another case study because we got examples here. So Dr. Mark, who we talked about earlier, that financial advisor, specializes in retirement planning for healthcare professionals. That's very niche down, right? So when we first connected, he was skeptical about podcasting, to put it mildly. He said, "I don't have time for a vanity project. I need activities with a clear ROI." But after our initial consultation, he agreed to try podcasting for a specific 6-month evaluation plan. And if he didn't see concrete results by then, he'd pull the plug. Have you noticed that 75% of them end after week 10? That's because they're not measuring their ROI. They don't know what's going on. So here's what happened within 1 month. We developed a podcast strategy focused on the unique financial challenges facing physicians and nurses. We structured the format to showcase both his expertise and his approachable personality, and we alternated between solo episodes and interviews with clients who had successfully navigated retirement transitions. He knew how to tell that story. He had that down. The tech was secondary, and the first episodes were rough. Mark was stiff on the microphone, and those initial download numbers were modest, right? Around 35 per episode. So based on these surface metrics alone, most would have called it a failure, but we stayed focused on the deeper ROI dimensions. By month 3, something interesting started happening. Mark was getting recognized at medical conferences. Physicians would approach him saying, "I feel like I already know you from your podcast." So these warm introductions converted client relationships at 3 times the rate of his cold outreach effort. Remember, it's about warming people up, letting them get to know you. You're warming people up through your podcast. So in month 4, a local medical journal discovered his podcast and invited him to write a monthly column on physician finances. This exposure positioned him as the go-to financial advisor in his region's healthcare community. By the 6-month evaluation point, here were Mark's results. He had speaking requests that increased by 340%. He had media mentions. He had 12 that were 0 before. His high-ticket client inquiries were up 62%. His revenue, show me the money, increased by $157,000 compared to the previous 6 months. And here's the most interesting part. His total podcast downloads during this period, just under 6,000. By traditional podcasting metrics, his show would be considered small, but those 6,000 downloads were concentrated among his ideal clients, his ideal listeners, healthcare professionals with complex financial needs. That targeted nature of his content meant that nearly every listener was a potential high-value client. Mark now credits his podcast as the single most effective marketing channel in this business. He said, "It's not about how many people hear me, it's about who hears me and how they perceive me afterwards." That is huge, right? So now that you understand the true ROI potential of expert podcasting, let's talk about how to implement those insights. Here are 5 actionable steps to maximize your podcast ROI from day one. So the first step, I want you to start with a strategy, not technology, a strategy. The biggest ROI killer is launching without clarity before you know what you're doing. So before you buy a microphone or choose a hosting platform, answer these questions. Who exactly do you want to reach? What transformation can you help them achieve? How will your podcast position you differently from competitors? What content format will best showcase your specific expertise? Spending time on this strategy up front will dramatically accelerate your results. Now, listen to me again, because when I go into forums of podcasting, everyone's talking about what microphone should I use? What platform should I use? Which one's better? How do I get monetized, in my first day? That's not the important part. If you don't know how to tell a good story, and if you don't know who you're talking to, all that other stuff will not matter. You're going to get frustrated and you're going to quit. That's what happens. 75% of people do not continue their podcast after 10 episodes because they did not start with the right strategy. Okay, step 2. Design your content ecosystem. Before recording your first episode, create a simple system for repurposing your podcast content. I want you to identify what platforms matter most for your audience. Where are they? Develop templates for transforming your audio into other formats. You can use Canva, you can use Descript. I love Descript. It's my favorite one. I want you to set up a workflow for distributing this content consistently. Are you scheduling it? Are you putting it on a paper calendar and writing it down and figuring out when to schedule it? How are you doing it? Build your ecosystem. Doing that ensures that maximum leverage for every minute you spend recording. So you are maximizing your time. And then step 3, I want you to build connection before size. Rather than obsessing over download growth, focus on listener engagement. That's so much more important. The number, how many people you have, is less important than how engaged they are. And you see that in algorithms. You see that in algorithms across Instagram, across YouTube, across all of these different platforms. Numbers are great, but have you heard people say, well, I don't care if you downvote me or upvote me because it's engagement. And that's what matters, because that's what matters. That's what the algorithm loves. And it's because it's important. Your number is less important as how engaged your audience is. So there are a few ways to do that. You could include specific calls to action in each episode. You could create opportunities for listeners to connect with you personally. You could acknowledge and respond to all listener feedback. You can track consultation requests or contact form submissions from podcast listens. Remember, one deeply engaged listener can be worth more than 1,000 passive ones. Okay, now step 4. I want you to accelerate your authority through structure. The structure of your podcast significantly impacts how quickly it builds your authority. So I want you to develop a consistent episode format that highlights your expertise. That includes teaching segments, that demonstrates your unique approach, or that references real client results. And we anonymize them here. You anonymize them too. Unless they don't want you to. If they're okay with you putting their name out there, go for it. And occasionally mention your credentials or your expertise when relevant. These structural elements position you as an authoritative guide, not just an entertainer, right? And then 5, I want you to measure what matters. So I'm going to help you with that. I have got a custom GPT that will actually do the data analysis on all of these different sections that we talked about. It is going to ask you questions. You're going to plug in the numbers, and you're going to get an ROI evaluation and prediction of the next 6 months. So if you want to learn how to do this, if you want to use this interactive tool to find out what your real ROI of your podcast is, I have got a link to find it in the description down there, or the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. The link is there. It is so much fun. It's so much fun to go, oh, that's my actual ROI. It has nothing to do with the analytics that you get from Buzzsprout or Spotify or Apple or anything like that. Those are not the analytics we're looking at. We're looking at What are you bringing in? Is it worth your time? Is it worth your money? Because some of your time is worth money. Are you actually getting a return on the investment you're putting into your podcast? And that's because launching a podcast is not just about learning to use a microphone or editing software. It is about building a strategic foundation that aligns with your business goals from day one. When you have that foundation in place, everything else becomes easier, from content creation to audience growth to monetization. This is something that I am particularly passionate about because I have seen too many brilliant experts give up on podcasting before they even experience the incredible ROI that it can deliver. You've got to stick with it a little bit. They get stuck in these technical details or overwhelmed by conflicting advice or overwhelmed by the time it takes in those initial stages. And that's why I've developed that comprehensive system for experts who want to launch a podcast efficiently, one that bypasses the common roadblocks and accelerates the path to results. If what we've talked about today resonates with you, and if you're ready to experience the true ROI of expert podcasting without months of trial and error, I do have something special for you. For the past year, I've been refining a guided 30-day podcast program that's called Fearless Launch Lab. This is not a figure it out yourself that I've given you a course and you've got to do it. This is a comprehensive cohort-based experience where I personally guide you through every step of launching your professional podcast, from developing your unique podcast strategy to mastering the technical elements to creating a content plan that ensures long-term success. We've covered it all in a structured step-by-step process. In June, I'm only taking 8 people into this cohort because I want this to be high touch. I want it to be coaching specific. I want to get you from idea to launch within 30 days. So it is exclusive to only 8 people in June. So if you're interested in learning more, visit the link in the show notes or find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Stephanie Dean, where I'm sharing more details all week. Applications do close on May 31st and the program begins June 3rd. So whether you join the Fearless Launch Lab or not, I hope today's episode has given you a new perspective on the true ROI potential of podcasting for experts like you. So before we wrap up today, let me leave you with this thought. Every day that you postpone sharing your expertise through podcasting is a day your voice isn't reaching the people who need it the most. It's a day that your competitors might be claiming the audio space in your industry. It's a day of missed connections, untapped authority, and lost content opportunities. The question isn't whether you can afford to launch a podcast. It's whether you can afford not to. Your expertise deserves to be heard. Your message does matter, and your future audience is waiting for you. Thank you for tuning in to Fearless Podcasting. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with a fellow expert who's been considering the podcasting journey. Until next time, this is Dr. Stephanie Dean, encouraging you to be fearless with your voice.